Have you ever packed your whole life into two small bags while holding the tiny hand of a child who trusted you more than anyone else? I have. 5 years old. That was my son's age the night we walked away from everything we had ever known. No car, no money, no family willing to help. Just one backpack on my shoulder, one small suitcase in my hand, and a little boy who looked up at me and asked the question that still echoes in my heart. Mom, are we going home tomorrow? I smiled, not because I believed things would be okay, but because he deserved hope, even when I had none left. If someone had told me that night that one day my son would become one of the most respected young business leaders in this city, I would have laughed through my tears. But life has a strange way of rewarding those who refuse to give up, and the people who threw us away never imagined they would one day stand in line, waiting for my son's signature. This isn't just a story about success, it's a story about betrayal, about sacrifice, about a promise between a mother and her child, and about how quiet determination can become the loudest answer to those who once believed you would never matter. My name is Emma. 10 years ago, I thought I had the perfect life. I lived in a peaceful neighborhood outside Chicago with my husband Daniel and our little son Noah. Our house wasn't huge, but every room carried a memory. Noah's drawings covered the refrigerator. The backyard held the tiny swing Daniel had built before Noah was born. Every Sunday morning we made pancakes together, or at least, that's how I wanted to remember those days. The truth was very different. Daniel had changed long before I noticed. Late nights became normal. Phone calls ended the moment I entered the room. Weekend business trips suddenly appeared every month. Whenever I asked questions, he always had the same answer. You're overthinking everything. I wanted to believe him, because believing a lie sometimes feels easier than facing the truth. Then one evening, everything collapsed. It was Noah's 5th birthday. I had decorated the house with blue balloons. His favorite chocolate cake sat on the kitchen table. He kept running to the window every few minutes. Dad's coming soon, right? I looked at the clock. 7 o'clock, then 8, then 9. Daniel never came. Instead, my phone rang. It wasn't Daniel. It was someone I had never met. A calm female voice said only one sentence. I think you deserve to know. Your husband is having dinner with another woman tonight. Then she hung up. At first, I refused to believe it. But something inside me knew. After Noah fell asleep on the couch, still wearing his little birthday hat, I drove to the restaurant she had mentioned. I wish I hadn't. Daniel was there, laughing, holding another woman's hand, looking happier than I had seen him in years. That moment didn't just break my heart. It shattered every dream I had built around our family. I didn't scream. I didn't make a scene. I simply turned around, got back into my car, and cried so hard I could barely breathe. That night, I realized something painful. Sometimes the person who promises to protect your heart is the very one who breaks it the most. And I had no idea. The worst betrayal was still waiting for me. I didn't tell Daniel what I had seen that night, not because I was afraid, because I wanted the truth to reveal itself. The next morning, he walked into the kitchen as if nothing had happened. He smiled. Morning. I looked at him for a long moment. How could someone lie so easily? How could someone kiss his son goodbye after spending the previous evening with another woman? Noah ran into his arms. Dad, you missed my birthday. Daniel knelt down and hugged him. I'm sorry, buddy. Work got crazy. It was another lie, and this time I watched him tell it without even blinking. That was the moment I stopped trying to save my marriage. Instead, I started preparing to save my son. Over the next few weeks, the distance between us grew wider. Daniel stayed out later. He guarded his phone like it held a national secret. When I asked if we should try counseling, he laughed. We're fine, Emma. You're making problems where there aren't any. I nodded, but deep inside, I knew something else was coming. I just didn't know how cruel it would be. One rainy Thursday afternoon, Daniel asked me to meet him in the living room. His parents were already sitting there. His mother never liked me. From the day we got married, she made it clear I wasn't good enough for her son. She believed Daniel deserved someone richer, someone from a better family. She looked at me with the same cold expression she always had. Daniel didn't waste any time. "I want a divorce." The room became silent. I felt as though all the air had disappeared. I looked at Noah, who was quietly coloring at the dining table, unaware that his whole world was about to change. I asked only one question: "Is there someone else?" Daniel didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence was louder than any confession. Then his mother spoke. "You'll be better off leaving now. Daniel has a future to think about." Her words stung, but what came next hurt even more. "You've always been holding him back." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. For years I had worked 2 jobs whenever money was tight. I had sacrificed promotions to stay home with Noah. I had supported Daniel while he built his career, yet somehow, I was the problem. I stood up. "I won't fight you, but don't expect me to beg." Daniel looked relieved, as if my dignity made everything easier for him. The divorce moved quickly. Too quickly. I later discovered why. Daniel had already planned everything. Most of the money was in accounts I couldn't access. The lawyer he hired knew every legal trick. By the time the papers were signed, I walked away with almost nothing: 1 suitcase, a few boxes, and full custody of Noah. Daniel didn't even argue about custody. At first, I thought it was because he loved our son enough to avoid a painful fight. I was wrong. He simply didn't want the responsibility. As we packed our belongings, Noah hugged his favorite stuffed bear. "Mom, where are we going?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "We're going somewhere we can start over." He smiled. "Will Dad come later?" I couldn't answer. That evening we stood outside the house one last time. It had once been filled with birthday parties, Christmas mornings, bedtime stories. Now it felt like a stranger's home. I took Noah's hand. We walked away without looking back. Behind us, Daniel closed the front door. Not once did he call our names. Not once did he ask us to stay. The man who had promised forever watched us leave as if we had never mattered. The first few months were the hardest of my life. We rented a tiny apartment above an old grocery store. The walls were thin, the heater barely worked. Sometimes I skipped dinner so Noah could have a full plate. He never noticed. Or maybe he noticed more than I realized. One night, I found him quietly placing half of his sandwich back into the refrigerator. "Aren't you hungry?" I asked. He smiled. "I'm saving it for tomorrow." My heart broke. A 5-year-old shouldn't have to think that way. That night, after he fell asleep, I sat on the kitchen floor and cried. Not because I had lost my husband, but because my son was paying the price for someone else's betrayal. I wiped away my tears and made a promise. I don't know how long it will take. I don't know how hard it will be. But one day, Noah, they will regret treating us like we were nothing. And without realizing it, that promise became the beginning of everything. The next morning I stopped asking one question: why did this happen to me? Instead, I asked a different one: what can I do today to give Noah a better tomorrow? That single change transformed my life. I found a full-time job at a small accounting office during the day. At night, I cleaned office buildings downtown. On weekends, I helped a local bakery with bookkeeping. Some people called it too much. I called it survival. Every dollar had a purpose: rent, food, school supplies, a small savings account with Noah's name on it. No matter how tired I felt, I never touched that account. It wasn't just money, it was hope. Years passed quietly. Noah grew into a kind, thoughtful boy. He never asked for expensive toys. He never complained when his classmates wore new sneakers while he wore the same pair for another year. One afternoon when he was 10, his teacher called me. For a moment, I panicked. Had he gotten into trouble? Instead, she smiled. "Mrs. Carter, your son stayed after school today." "Why?" He was helping another student with math. I looked at Noah. You didn't tell me. He shrugged. He was crying because he didn't understand. That was Noah. Even when we had almost nothing, he always found something to give. Meanwhile, Daniel had disappeared from our lives. Birthdays came and went without a phone call. Christmas passed without a single card. Sometimes Noah stood by the window for a few minutes before dinner, not because he expected gifts, because part of him still hoped his father might remember him. Eventually, even that hope faded. One evening, Noah asked me something I had feared for years. Mom, did Dad stop loving me? I took a deep breath. No. He stopped making the right choices. There is a difference. Children should never carry the weight of an adult's mistakes. I refused to let Daniel's decisions define Noah's worth. When Noah turned 16, something unexpected happened. His school announced a citywide business competition. The challenge was simple: create a business idea that could solve a real problem. The winner would receive a scholarship and the chance to present the idea to local investors. Noah came home excited. I want to enter, I smiled. You should. Then his face changed. What if I lose? I placed my hands on his shoulders. The only way you lose is if you never try. For weeks, our tiny apartment became a workshop. Sticky notes covered the walls, books filled the kitchen table. Late at night, I often woke up and found Noah still working. He wasn't chasing money. He was chasing possibility. Competition day arrived. The room was filled with students from expensive private schools. Many had professional presentations, designer suits, parents who owned successful companies. For a moment, Noah looked intimidated. Then he remembered something I had told him years earlier. Confidence doesn't come from what you own. It comes from knowing who you are. He walked onto the stage. For 10 minutes, the room became completely silent. He spoke with honesty, with intelligence, with heart. When he finished, the audience stood up. Not everyone, but enough. That was the first standing ovation of his life. It would not be the last. 3 weeks later, the results were announced. First place, Noah Carter. He won the scholarship. But something even bigger happened. One of the judges approached us after the ceremony. He introduced himself as Michael Reynolds, a successful entrepreneur. I'd like to invest in your son's idea. For a second, I thought I had misunderstood him. You mean, really invest? He smiled. I've been in business for 30 years. I know talent when I see it. And your son has something money can't buy. Character. As we walked home that evening, Noah looked at me with tears in his eyes. We did it, Mom. I smiled. No. We're just getting started. Little did we know. The news of Noah's success had already reached someone from our past, someone who had ignored us for years, someone who suddenly wanted to become part of our lives again. A week after Noah's victory, my phone rang. The number wasn't saved. I almost ignored it. Hello? A familiar voice answered. Emma, it's Daniel. For a moment, I couldn't speak. After 11 years of silence, the man who had forgotten his own son suddenly remembered my number. I heard about Noah, he said. I'm proud of him. Proud? The word felt almost insulting. He had missed birthdays, graduations, school plays, late-night homework, the tears, the struggles, the victories, and now he wanted to say he was proud. I kept my voice calm. He didn't become this person overnight, Daniel. There was a long silence. Then he quietly asked, Can I see him? I looked across the room. Noah was sitting at the table, working on new designs for his growing business. He looked happy, peaceful, a peace we had fought for. I'll ask him, I replied. That evening, I told Noah everything. He didn't seem angry. He didn't even seem surprised. He simply stared out the window for a long moment. Finally, he asked one question. Why now? I didn't have an answer. Maybe success had reminded Daniel that he had a son. Maybe guilt had finally caught up with him. Or maybe He saw an opportunity. A few days later, Noah agreed to meet him. Not because he needed a father, but because he wanted closure. They met at a quiet coffee shop downtown. I stayed outside. This conversation belonged to them. An hour later, Noah walked out alone. He got into the car and quietly fastened his seatbelt. "How did it go?" I asked. He smiled sadly. He said he always loved me. I waited. He also asked if I'd consider bringing him into the business. I closed my eyes. There it was. The real reason. Noah looked at me. I told him no. Not because I hate him, but because the people who build something should be the ones who protect it. I reached over and held his hand. At that moment, I realized something beautiful. The little boy who once waited by the window for his father had become a man who no longer needed anyone's approval. Over the next few years, Noah's company expanded faster than any of us imagined. His idea helped small local businesses grow through affordable technology. One city became 3, 3 became 12. Soon, his company became one of the largest employers in the region. People began calling him one of the city's youngest business leaders. The newspapers loved his success story, but they rarely knew the whole truth. They saw the awards. They didn't see the tiny apartment. They saw the company. They didn't see the nights when we shared one meal. They admired the success. They never witnessed the sacrifice that made it possible. Then came the invitation. The city announced a major redevelopment project that would transform an entire downtown district. Several companies competed for the contract. After months of review, one company won. Noah's. The day the agreement was signed, reporters surrounded him. One journalist asked, "How does it feel knowing your company will shape the future of this city?" Noah smiled. Then he gave an answer I will never forget. "This city doesn't belong to me. It belongs to every person who refused to give up when life became difficult. I just hope our work makes it a little better." Those words spread everywhere. People praised his humility, but I knew where that humility came from. It came from every hardship we had endured together. A few months later, I attended the grand opening of the new downtown project. As I looked across the crowd, I noticed 2 familiar faces: Daniel and his mother. Time had changed them. They stood quietly in the back, saying nothing. Noah saw them too. He walked over. He smiled politely. He shook Daniel's hand. He greeted his grandmother with respect. There was no anger, no bitterness, no desire to embarrass them, only grace. As they turned to leave, Daniel looked back and softly said, "I'm sorry." Noah nodded. "I forgive you." But forgiveness doesn't change the past. It simply allows us to move forward. Daniel lowered his head. He understood. Some opportunities only come once. When you throw them away, no amount of regret can bring them back. That night, as the city lights reflected across the river, Noah and I stood together in silence. He looked at the skyline and smiled. "Remember when we left with just 2 bags?" I laughed. "I remember every step." He wrapped his arm around my shoulder. "You always told me that success isn't the best revenge. It's proving that pain doesn't get to decide your future." I smiled through tears. "You listened." "No," he replied. "I watched you." And in that moment, I realized the greatest victory wasn't the business. It wasn't the awards. It wasn't even the city we had helped rebuild. It was that my son had grown into a man who chose kindness over bitterness, integrity over shortcuts, and purpose over pride. The people who once looked down on us eventually looked up to him, not because he sought revenge, but because he refused to let betrayal define his life. Sometimes, the strongest answer to those who doubt you isn't revenge at all. It's building a life so meaningful that their disbelief becomes nothing more than a forgotten chapter in your story. The end.